Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have Adam Kling with us today. Adam is the CEO and co-founder of Territories.ai with nearly 20 years of experience in managing, building, and scaling scaled and revenue teams. So this will be an interesting conversation. Adam has worked extensively on 0 to 1 startups, driving hypergrowth in established organizations as well. He's a proven track record in overcoming unique challenges at various stages of growth. So welcome, Adam, to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Great. So let's deep dive into it, right? So you obviously have had an impressive career in building and scaling sales and revenue teams, right? So could you share what motivated you to focus on driving ARR from zero to hyper growth? Like, how did your journey start?
Yeah, I was really fortunate early in my career to start in a commercial insurance brokerage called Citadel Insurance Services. So I was the third hire outside of the founding team, sub $1 million in ARR, and it was really my first experience building anything from scratch. And the nice thing, at an organization that small is your day-to-day interactions are with the founders. And so I was brought on to take over a really small program and try and turn that into obviously a commercially viable solution for them. Coming in, starting at less than 100,000 in recurring revenue, and over 4 years we grew that book of business from about 100K to over $15 million. That really, I knew that I wanted to get into the software industry, but that early experience in commercial insurance really just kind of put this desire in me to always focus on that 0 to 1. I think there's something it's hard to replace and it's hard to find elsewhere when you get to build something from scratch. From there, I obviously joined the rocket ship that was Qualtrics. So, I was not in the 0 to 1 function there. I joined at, just under 100 million in revenue. I was there for 6.5 years. We went from, probably 85 million in revenue with 200 employees to almost 750 million in revenue, 3,000 employees, and getting acquired by SAP.
Yeah, that was
I think the big value. Oh, go ahead.
I think that was one of the biggest SaaS acquisitions ever.
Yeah. Yeah. So an $8.5 billion acquisition. Interesting story. A lot of people don't know this, but we were 2 days away from our IPO. And so we had this all hands meeting on a Sunday night. We thought it was going to be some exciting announcement about the IPO on the following Tuesday. And then we have Ryan Smith, the CEO of Qualtrics, and Bill McDermott, the CEO of SAP, sitting together talking about how Qualtrics is joining SAP. We're not IPOing. So definitely an interesting journey. The big value there of being able to experience hyper growth at scale is just being a part of the machine. You get to see what's required to go from 100 to 200 million to 200 to 400 million, and the constant change and constant growth required, both at an organizational level and at an individual level. And so that was just a phenomenal opportunity for me. But getting purchased by 100,000 employee company, that was a little bit big for me. I knew I wanted to go back to that startup world, and so moved over to Lucid Software for a little while to help get their enterprise motion off the ground. And then I've spent the last 4 or 5 years now with true startups, right? So Beehive AI at 150,000 ARR, helping scale over to 2.5 million in a year. And then the last 2.5 years prior to Territories.ai with Platform One.
Wow. So we have seen the entire journey, not just 0 to 1, and because we have a lot of folks who are actually in the scaled side as well. So you are basically saying, bring it on, like 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 500. Right, I've done it all. Probably the $1 billion revenue mark is a elusive one where I don't think you have that. But other than that, everything is fair game.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a difference between being a part of a $500 million, $750 million organization, and being the CRO or the CEO of that organization. So I think my benefit was getting to see how those decisions were made, what those decisions did to the organization, how it impacted teams, structures, and growth. But yeah, my most of my leadership experience, especially in a senior leadership position, has been on that smaller startup side. But it's been an incredible experience.
So Adam, that brings me to the next obvious question, which is, what is the difference between 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and like beyond that?
Yeah.
Like, what emotions? What has your experience been?
Yeah. So 0 to 1 is different. Obviously, all of those stages are different, but 0 to 1 is really unlike anything else. And I think a lot of founders, a lot of early team members, they focus on, how big can we get? How quickly can we do it? How big is our TAM? And I think the biggest thing that I've learned doing this multiple times now is it's not how big your TAM is. It's actually how focused is your TAM. And the most success that I've seen with 0 to 1 is not trying to identify, what are the top 3, 5, 7 ICPs that we may have? What is that first best customer? And then how do I replicate that first best customer? And that's hard. And a lot of founders, especially that don't come from a sales background, they want to get out of founder-led sales as quickly as possible. And so they'll close, well, we've got 2 customers, we have 3 customers, we're at 150,000 in ARR. And then they want to bring in that sales rep. And I think the best learning that an organization can have is having that founder highly involved, really in at least those first 10 to 15 customers. And again, depending on what that ARR looks like or ACV looks like, that could be your first $1 million in revenue, first $2 million in revenue.
Yeah.
But 0 to 1 is all about how do we identify that first best customer? How do we identify product fit? So not even product market fit yet, but product fit within that customer. And then how do we start to identify product market fit?
That's super important. And you are basically, that's music to my ears, because we are very strong advocates of ICP, right? And Sprouts is actually a go-to-market platform on that. And similar to what you just said, 1 to 2 million founder-led sales, right? Like, it's crucial. But what happens, Adam, also is the reality is sometimes you just don't want to say no to revenues in the early stages.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's easier said than done to figure out that best customer, because the customers will be like, hey, I want this, I want that. And you're just trying to be like, okay, let's just get the customers first and then figure out, are there any patterns between them? So how would you like solve for that?
Yeah. So Platform One is actually a great example here. At Platform One, it was a 30-year-old legacy business growing less than 10% year over year, based out of Australia. And I was brought in to help create a growth engine. They wanted to grow, obviously continue to grow in Australia, but accelerate that growth. They wanted to grow in Europe, where we had a very small presence. And then they wanted to start growing in the US as well, where they had one individual that was not a salesperson.
Right.
And the first thing that we focused on was, what do our customers look like? We're almost 10 million in ARR. We had 150 customers, give or take. But over time, we evolved from being really the automotive experts for the SaaS platform for automotive organizations in Australia, to working with a lot of different industries. A couple customers here, a couple customers there. And so how do you take that and start to replicate it internationally? And then how do you actually take that and say, hey, 10% growth it's not going to do it. We need to get to 40, 50, 60% growth at 10 million ARR. And so the first thing we did is really customer interviews. We looked at all the data. We started to chat with our existing customers. Why do you use us? What makes us unique to you? And why have you continued to use us? Right. And so the nice thing is that, we had customer relationships that lasted 10, 15 years. And so we had an incredible amount of data. And as we started to move into Europe had a decent foothold, but it was with a legacy product we weren't focused on.
Right.
The US had no presence. And so the first thing, similar to what you talked about, was let's cast a bit of a broad net and let's start to see how the metrics pan out. And what that means to me is, we'll talk with we're going to target 15 industries based on what our customer base looks like. But then which of those industries are converting the quickest from initial meeting to opportunity and from opportunity to close? Which of them have the highest conversion rates? Which of them have the largest deal sizes? And so being able to start to look at that data, we actually identified that B2B manufacturing in the United States was our just hands down best ICP at Platform One. And once we started to see those numbers, our initial meetings went from, again, with a small team, we were setting 12 to 15 meetings, initial meetings a month. Once we doubled down on that one ICP, that shot up to 40 initial meetings a month. We had to hire, we had to grow that SDR team. That ended up tripling our new pipeline generated each month. And it's, our revenue in the US grew at 450%, right? That's a big number, but when it's really small revenue, it's easy to do that.
No, and like 10 meetings to 40 meetings based on the ICP, right? Did you have to scale up the team? And like, can you, like, per SDR, how many meetings were you able to generate? Because, there are a lot of folks who are interested in like US GTM, like how do you start getting those meetings? So like, how many SDRs? Could you also talk to us about like which channels work the best for you, even though it was like manufacturing focused, non-tech? Like, was it email, LinkedIn, phone calls? Like, how were you getting these meetings?
Yeah. So I joined beginning of 2021, which is right at the beginning of when SaaS started to blow up in the US.
Right.
And this, the concept of growth at all costs versus efficient growth, obviously we started to impact organizations. Right. And so we grew our SDR team from 1 to 9, averaging 8 to 10 meetings per SDR. Right. But a lot of it from the board down was focused on, we just need to generate initial traction and growth. And as we started to pivot, as obviously the market changed as well, this concept of let's be a lot more efficient. Let's do this a better way. And so we actually shrunk that SDR organization down to 6 and improved their meeting set per rep to it was between 15 and 16 per month.
Wow, right? That's a lot.
And so it is. And a lot of that almost exclusively came from outbound, right? When we talk about channels, the organization was completely bootstrapped. It had never taken on outside funding. And we had a board that was very focused on short-term ROI on budget. So it was hard to build a strong, viable marketing engine focused on brand recognition and inbound. A lot of it was things like webinars, right? It was how do we just quickly get to MQLs? And so a lot of our budget was really focused on that outbound motion. And we would set maybe 15%, maybe on a good month, 20% of our meetings via email. I think I agree with most of the conversations on LinkedIn that, email is really saturated right now. And you have to focus more on quality over quantity. But, that 85% of our meetings set month over month was cold calls. Yeah. And, a lot of people talk about cold calling is dead, but if you really understand your ICP and you really understand your value proposition, it's much easier to set those meetings.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's very interesting because we're kind of seeing the same pattern across the board. Email response rates have obviously dwindled and keep going down. LinkedIn is coming across as an interesting channel where we are seeing people get more meetings out of LinkedIn, reach outs. And then cold calling, as you said, like, I've had several of those discussions here, LinkedIn Lives, where cold calling works, man. I mean, if you do it right, can you explain a little bit more on that? Like, how do you get it right? Like, you get the ICP. What does that script look like? What is the secret sauce there?
Yeah, so secret sauce is hard, but I think, the method that worked really well for us is it was not I'm going to call the same person 3 times in a row. It also was not I'm going to call them 3 times in a day. What worked really well for us is an initial call, leaving a voicemail. I was engaged in a LinkedIn conversation about this, I think 2-3 weeks ago. The difference between leaving a voicemail and everyone saying they don't listen to voicemails. almost everyone that I know, and a lot of the data that I'm seeing is with transcribed voicemails. Everyone at least looks at your voicemail. You're not going to read 2 minutes worth of a voicemail, but hi, this is Adam from Territories.ai. You'll see that then sticks. We then send a follow-up email referencing that voicemail. And then the next time we call, not only are they recognizing that number, they're recognizing that number with Territories.ai. And I think that was really for us where we started to see a bit more of that traction in cold calls, and simply recognizing like, hey, yeah, you called me yesterday. You're with, this is a sales call, right? Most of the time they didn't remember the company name, but they remembered like, oh, you're calling because of X. And if they recognize that and they answered, they're much more likely to say, yes, I'll give you 20 seconds. I'll give you 30 seconds. And then you really have that opportunity to convert.
Right. Got it. So no, that's interesting. And Adam, so this is outbound. What about inbound? Like, sure, there will be companies which will focus on outbound, short-term ROI. But I've also seen a lot of like companies for the 1 to 10 exclusively use inbound, generate huge SEO traffic, do some paid stuff, right? And the inbound leads are sufficient for them to go from 1 to 10.
Mhm.
Uh, how do you like any thoughts on that? And how do you strike the balance between inbound and outbound?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think if you have funding, um, starting, doing an inbound only is interesting. I've never done that. I would be hesitant on that just because I feel personally like the dollars you would spend on generating inbound without actually understanding who your customers are yet, that's just a really, really high cost of acquisition. And
Okay.
then as you do close those customers, it gets really hard to understand which one of those are good or not. And depending on, if you have a monthly subscription versus an annual subscription, what do your renewal cycles look like? It could be months or a year before you know if this is actually a good customer for me or not. And so that's
Mhm.
why I prefer outbound, especially initially, is that it gives you much more just accurate, real time information on, is this the right person? Are these the right conversations? Is this resonating? But if you do have budget, it's not a bad thing to have some type of an outbound cadence to supplement inbound. And then as you scale, right? So as you get out of that 0 to 1 and you're moving to 1.5, so you're going to 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. I think inbound becomes just absolutely critical. And I think having a mindset as a founder, as a CFO, even of dollars on immediate returns, right? So an MQL that I can track against a budget from last quarter, that's great. That's important. But if you're not allocating dollars toward building a brand, building a recognizable product, building a reputation, then you're actually hampering your ability to have effective outbound as you grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are obviously in the Gen AI world now. So, what is the role of AI according to you? Right, like it's been almost 2 years since the November 22 announcement of ChatGPT. Uh, what are you seeing in terms of the market trends? Right, like how's AI penetrating and positively or negatively impacting GTM?
Yeah. So for me personally, I couldn't have started this startup. I couldn't have started Territories AI with Gen AI. And that's not even from we have to use it for our product. That is it allows me to 2x myself. It gives me twice the amount of time back in my day to build this. When we think about how it's going to impact go to market, I think the thing that's really interesting right now is we're seeing AI agents start to enter. They're becoming more and more prevalent in call center and support scenarios. We're starting to see a few of them. I think there's 3 or 4 that I've seen now creep into sales. And when you hear people talk about, I hate cold calls, I hate receiving cold calls, like just imagine how much that's going to get amplified when they realize that cold caller is a robot.
Yeah.
And so I personally, I don't see AI replacing go to market. I see AI coming in and playing the role of automation, simplification, and amplification, right? So it's going to automate processes for sales teams. It's going to simplify those processes and tasks, and then it's going to help them get better at their jobs. And I think Sprouts AI is an easy example of this, right? So I think we'll see more adoption of AI that helps individual sellers at the IC level, leaders with things like forecasting and territory building, and also executives in being able to understand how is this impacting both short and long-term goals, right? I imagine as a sales rep having real-time information. I'm brand new to the organization, and I already have data at my fingertips of who should I be reaching out to, how do I message to them, and why would they be a good customer?
Yep. No, and that's great. And personally for you, Adam, how did it improve your productivity by 2x? Where are you using it today?
Yeah, so today I use it everywhere from how do we build out our own go-to-market strategy to how do we align our messaging, pricing, packaging to our ICP. I leverage, so I use ChatGPT quite a bit, and I'll leverage ChatGPT to build out customer profiles, and then have it play out those customer profiles for me to understand if I'm fitting well in my market. On top of that, no, go ahead.
Can you double click on that? That's super interesting. So what is the prompt you're giving to GPT for building out these profiles? And can you walk us through this motion?
Yeah. So from I know we've got 9 minutes left. So from a high level, it starts with, I have an assumption about who my customer is. I prompt ChatGPT to be that customer. Right. I prompt ChatGPT to define what their pain points are in a revenue operations or a head of sales role. And then I will play through a text-based discovery to understand how ChatGPT is responding. And then I'll do that with multiple profiles. So we'll do that with a head of sales that has a team of 4 or 5 people. We'll do that with a VP of sales that has a sales organization of 20. With a VP of revenue operations that has 30 or 40 people, and a RevOps team of 2, and walking through how they're responding to the pain points that we know our problem solves for, so that we can build much more hyper personalized messaging. And that's been, it's worked really well for me, because as I'm actually going out, right, because we're pre-product, and so all of my conversations today are getting beta customers on board. And as I'm having those outbound conversations, I'm already being able to laser focus on 2 or 3 personas. And I know that one persona is just that, again, best first customer. And that messaging resonates. And my conversion rate from, yeah, this is interesting, to, yes, I absolutely want to be a beta customer, is exponentially better.
Got it. Interesting. So, no, this is fascinating. So you're kind of using ChatGPT as a buyer persona and doing a role play with the buyer persona to fine tune your pitch.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Interesting. There are companies like Hyperbound and others who are kind of getting into this space of creating those buyer personas for you and doing a back and forth for the sales team. You are doing it with ChatGPT, and it's working for you, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And so this is not what Territories.ai does. This is what I'm leveraging to help us figure out how to sell, right?
Yep. No, absolutely. And so, when you start Territories.ai right now, it's young, it's like you said, pre-revenue. How do you guys think about differentiating yourself? It's a cluttered market, it's a cluttered space. What do you guys do? How do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah. So there's 2 areas here, right? The first is I'm a startup in a saturated market. I'm a CRM company. You have Salesforce and HubSpot that have a combined, 350,000 customers worldwide, with combined revenue of 34, 35 billion. How do you compete in that space? How do you actually grow when you've got such a level of recognition? I mean, Salesforce, people that have nothing to do with CRM and don't work at any organization that uses them still has heard of Salesforce. And so I think the thing that's interesting there is understanding why customers are frustrated with those platforms. And if you can understand why customers are frustrated with those platforms, it allows you to start to figure out where you can position yourself. I think Adio is a great example of this, right? Adio is a relatively new, I think they just took on a Series A next gen CRM. And what they've done is they've come in and positioned themselves to solve for the biggest pain points of both Salesforce and HubSpot customers. You're either frustrated with a lack of flexibility, or you're frustrated by the just complete complexity that's required. And Adio solves for both of them. And so they're coming in, making a huge splash in a saturated market because they've identified this niche that resonates with an incredibly large potential customer base. At Territories, our market is much less mature. We have enough players in our space that it's quite competitive. When you think of revenue operations, that whole concept is only a couple of years old. Sales operations is maybe a decade older than that. And so for us, it really came down to customer research, customer interviews, and for us, it's potential customer, right? And then competitive analysis. What are our competitors talking about? Who are they focusing on? And I think that's a great route for most organizations to go down initially is your larger competitors cannot create the best product for every single customer type.
Yeah.
If you can find the underserved customer, the customer that doesn't fit well for Salesforce, with a decent TAM, again, your TAM doesn't have to be $10 billion for your first customers. You just need to find a few. So a decent TAM, you focus there, and then you can expand and grow.
And that's so powerful, right? Because a lot of times people try and take the biggies head on, and it's like, no, just find your niche, find those first 10, first 50, first 100 customers, figure out what your real differentiation is, and then just really, really amplify that, right?
Yep.
And there's so many good examples like Clay and others who are exponentially growing just doing that, right? Like data quality was an issue, Clay came and fixed it. So yeah, no, Adam, this is awesome. And just like last few minutes, like what are the KPIs you prioritize at different stages of growth, right? Like, can you talk us through like, hey, outbound, let's focus on outbound, or inbound, like 0 to 1, I focus on these metrics. 1 to 10, I focus on these. What are those KPIs?
Yeah. So 0 to 1 is outbound. It's all about how much pipeline are we creating? What is the quality of that pipeline? There's a difference between a big pipeline and a healthy pipeline. What is the quality of that pipeline? What does deal progression look like? And where are our wins coming from? And then doubling down where those wins are coming from. As you go from 1 to 10, I think you can start to incorporate a lot more marketing initiatives. You can start to incorporate things like outbound, things like inbound led outbound, right? We're tracking visitors to your website, looking at people that are looking for your solution on websites like G2. But then as you start to get closer to that 10 million, I'd say 7, 8, 9, 10 million and above, new business becomes, or not becomes, maintains its position as cash is king. Mm-hmm. But you need to start thinking about increasing NRR, right? Because if you really want to achieve hyper growth and you really want to hit those growth metrics, you have to be focusing on how are we getting more and more revenue from our existing customers, right? Eventually, as you go from 10 to 25 to 50 million, you should be getting to a point where 70% of your net new revenue is coming from existing customer growth. Right. And if you're not doing that, then you're never going to hit those hyper growth metrics.
Right. And so basically you're saying your ACV has to go up once you cross the 10 million. So ACV becomes, and VCs have this favorite term of NRR, net revenue retention, right? Yep. Which is like, how much are you getting from your existing customers and how's it growing? So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Adam, this was great. Thank you so much for the golden nuggets. There was a lot of great advice out there, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Karan, it was great to meet you.
Any final thoughts, like any last message for the listeners?
I think if you're in founder mode, right? If you're getting started from scratch, you're sub 2 million in revenue, it's hard. It's hard. And so I think the one piece of advice that I would give is just understand that all the success stories you see overnight, none of those happened overnight, right?
Yeah.
Most of these organizations went through those first 12, 18, 24, sometimes 48 months of we're figuring this out, we're finding who those best customers are, and then we're hitting that traction. Like Slack's a great example. They started as it was something in the gaming industry, right? And they pivoted over to obviously collaborative corporate chat. And so again, focus on the small things, and that will take care of the big things.
Awesome. That couldn't be a better note to end this conversation. Thanks, Adam. Loved it.
Absolutely. Great to meet you.